Hey guys, Daggers here, and today we're going over our tier list for Wonder Heroes, Part 2, so let's dive right in. So next up on the list we have Cersei. Cersei is really interesting and I haven't seen her played very much. I haven't seen a whole lot of gameplay with Cersei, but I've been hearing great things about her, and maybe we'll do a touch-up video going a little bit more into depth with her. But Cersei is actually a better Ashanti, right? She has different ways of being played depending on the weapon. She has some weapons that, just over time do damage. She has weapons that do burn. She has some really insane legendary weapons as well that like summon glaciers, that freeze opponents. She has one that like I believe specifically raises the attack of your entire team. That's all it does. It just raises attack. I think it's like 30% if I'm not mistaken. I think it's called like Mech Justice. That's her 5-star weapon. Um and she could just be configured into a lot of different builds. Also, her ultimate is low-key kind of busted. If you're running a 4-person team, her ultimate speeds up the cooldown of all your other characters by 2. So, say for example, you have like Sigurd or Ling or Xion, who have like 5 more turns. You use her ultimate, and now you're at 3, and that's for everybody on your team. She reduces the cooldown of your entire team by 3, which is absolutely insane. Absolutely insane. Prices are okay, but the weapons need more accessibility for pricing. There's just too large of a gap. I believe her entry level weapon is $30, and then her Holy Codex is about 50 to 60, and then Mech Justice goes to like 120. So there's like, I've been finding that a lot of these guys in B tier, their weapons have these like huge gaps in between them in order to get some really good value. And the one for 120 really isn't even like that great per se. It's not until you start getting into like her more rare 5 stars, that are somewhere between like 200 to 500, right? Just because we haven't really seen a whole lot of Cersei, and her weapons aren't super accessible yet. Alrighty, next up we have Yori, and we don't see Yori super often. Yori is probably one of the best vanilla DPS characters that you can get. Her skins aren't terribly expensive. Her weapons, her base weapon, I think is super low as well. And even her epic weapon is pretty affordable, somewhere between $60 and $70. I think her weapons are pretty fair in terms of pricing. And she just offers really good damage, right? I think, out of everybody who's just a vanilla DPS character that doesn't have a whole lot of outplay, such as the D tier class and maybe even some of the C tier classes, for the amount of damage that she puts out, I think she definitely deserves to be in the B class. I would like to see more of her legendary weapons available to test out, as we do have a couple of Yoris in our scholarships. However, they're just a little too overpriced, in my opinion, and the cheapest 5-star weapon for Yori, in my opinion, is a little overpriced in comparison to what it offers, right? So we'll definitely revisit Yori in the future. The only issue with Yori is that she is a tiny bit squishy for her class. You would think that she would probably be a little bit more tankier like Sigurd, maybe not quite the same degree defense, but it would be nice if maybe her weapons somehow incorporated defense. She's just pure attack, just pure DPS, right? So I think she definitely belongs in the B tier. Not to mention, her range for her attacks is a lot better than some of her other counterparts. In terms of just being able to do damage and be able to have that reach is really good, and definitely one of the benefits for picking up a Yori. She can also just be configured into a lot of different builds. She isn't hard to use, and the prices are really decent for the stats that you get with her. Now, here's probably one of the more interesting characters, and that is Ashanti. Ashanti, if you're on a budget, is absolutely a no-go. And that's putting it mildly. Ashanti's floor weapon, I would not advise. It just is super lackluster. It summons these like tentacles, and her passive combined with that is just, it doesn't really do anything. It doesn't really go anywhere. However, if you're okay with spending, $60 on her epic weapon, then things start to get a little bit more interesting. Ashanti does a lot of these like defense down and resist down type of deals, where she's very similar to Cersei in some degree. Um, and her legendary weapons are absolutely busted. I mean, game breaking, so OP. If you're looking to spend like $300, and have a very unique character, definitely go with Ashanti in that case, because those weapon abilities are just absolutely insane. But I think if you don't really want to run a Nightingale and you want to run a different type of build, Ashanti is really interesting, because instead of healing your team, Ashanti actually reduces the defenses of your enemies, making them a lot squishier. And if you're running like DPS characters like Yori, Julia, maybe not necessarily Fuma, maybe some of the other S and A tier characters, you can make them really squishy and close out fights a lot faster. She's also just really good at dealing damage over time as well. And I think she's kind of underrated for the price. Her skins are super cheap. The weapons are pretty affordable. And I definitely think she, has earned her spot as a B tier character. Some people might argue she's more of a C tier, but I think her legendaries and just the uniqueness that she provides is definitely B tier quality, right? Alrighty. So now that we're done with the B tier class, let's move into the A tier. This is where things kind of get a little bit spicier, right? So in A tier, we're actually going to start off with Xion. Some people may argue that Xion is more of a S tier character. However, I find that she is borderline vanilla. Her damage is absolutely nutty. Her ultimate is borderline broken. However, I just don't see enough 1v1 potential without some serious armor. She is a bit squishy for her abilities, but I believe she is one of the highest DPS characters in the game. She's just really difficult to keep alive long term in a 1v1 situation, right? But she can close out a game if you have enough level ups on her, or level ups on the weapons. You can probably close out the game before she dies. So I definitely think if you're going to be running a team, you have a Xion, you're doing great already, pretty much. Now, in terms of her ultimate, it does scale, but it does do a percentage based on your enemy's health. So say, for example, if your enemy has about 30,000 health, she'll do around 10,000 in damage just on one ultimate. So if you can kind of cheese it and go into the next round for the boss with her ultimate and take out a third of that damage on round 1 or 2, it makes getting through bosses so much easier. So yeah, you can also execute hordes of enemies depending on the weapon that you get for her. Say for example, you're just surrounded by lots of enemies. If she gets their health below a certain point, she'll just straight up execute them. I'm not sure if there's a cooldown for it or if there's a certain amount of times you can trigger this. But that is really good just for getting through hordes of enemies. And just in general, her passive, her ultimate, everything just makes sense. She's super easy to use. Her floor weapon, I believe, starts at around $100, depending on the day that you're getting it. Her next weapon up is about 140, and that applies bleed, so other, your enemies won't be able to heal. And then the Muramasa, which just has so much damage in comparison to the floor weapon, I think starts at around 200, 220 more or less, and can go up to $400 if you really want some really good stats on the Muramasa. And then it just goes up from there, the more nuttier legendary weapons she has. So after Shion, next up in the A tier, you guessed it, Nightingale. So Nightingale is pretty much standard for a lot of teams. Nightingale can kind of close the gap if you don't know exactly what you're doing in the game, you don't know what to level up, and you're just kind of figuring out the game. Nightingale can really balance out your team and make sure that you're alive long enough to destroy whatever boss or hordes of enemies that you're going through. And she just overall, she's just a healer, right? Now, Nightingale can be played in a couple different ways depending on what weapon you're going for. However, unless you're willing to spend hundreds of dollars on her weapons, I think there are much better options for the effect, right? I think instead of keeping your team healthy, it's better to do more damage over time, right? And so you're gonna roughly spend, for like an okay Nightingale skin, you're gonna spend somewhere between like 50 to 60, maybe even $70 for like a max stat Nightingale. Now, the real kicker, unfortunately, is her weapons. Her currently, as of today, in the release of this video, her floor weapons go for about $150, and that isn't even a pure healing item. It does some healing and some damage. If you want to go for the pure healing item, you're looking between like 180. Let's make it a better 180 here. You're looking at about like 180 to 220, depending on the day that you get this, which I think is kind of insane for a healer. So you're looking at about 250 for a Nightingale just to get started. Now, her legendary weapons are also pretty busted. But yeah, if you just want one, I would be you might want to prepare your pocketbook, because it's going to hurt a little bit getting a Nightingale. And the last person in A tier is Fran. Fran's interesting. Okay. I've seen her played. I have a scholar who has a Fran. Her movement is insane. I mean, absolutely insane mobility in one character, right? Now, Fran kind of specializes in not dying, right? She can produce her own armor, shield around her. Her ultimate basically lets her go to different sides of the map. So for example, you could summon these like portals, right? Say this is the map pretty much, and you summon these portals on the maps, and you could do some damage to the enemy. Say this is the enemy. Okay, let me make this a little bit cleaner. Say this is the enemy right here. You could do damage to them at close range or whatever the case is, and then you'll get teleported to a random TP, which can actually kind of get you killed depending on the stage, right? But in most cases, if you're just fighting a solo boss, it keeps Fran alive a lot longer, and her ultimate increases her mobility, which is already insane as it is. And the damage is okay. Prices for her skins, I haven't really kept up with her skins, if I'm going to be fairly honest. I'm gonna say it's somewhere between $30 and $40 right now for an okay skin. I think if you want to max out, you're looking at more like 70 for like a max stat, which is actually surprisingly higher than Nightingale. But I just think it's because there aren't too many skins available for her. There isn't like a high supply of Fran skins currently. Weapons are okay. You know, you're looking for like somewhere between I think 60 to 100 for both her weapons. Actually, maybe even like 120 for her epic. Then her legendaries, there just aren't a lot of legendaries currently, but those run I think somewhere between $200 and $300, just because there isn't really any competition for the supply. Alrighty, now for the long-awaited S tier. First up, we have Helen. Helen is probably my favorite S tier character. Now, what makes Helen great is freaking everything. Helen is a bright truck. Okay. So this is the way Helen works, right? So Helen attacks in a long range pattern. There's a 1 grid separation that she can't hit in. And I believe she hits up to 4 grids away. I want to say it's either 3 or 4. I want to say it's 4 grids. Like so. And there's 2 of them. Right? Which already makes her better than Angela here in D tier. Just because you get so much more out of Helen, right? Now, Helen not only already does a lot of damage, so what makes her even better is that she also passively does a attack down on your enemies. So say, for example, you're fighting somebody who's, dealing a lot of damage, like Helen, for example, I think in chapter 4 it is. She constantly reduces the attack of the enemies over time. Now, her cooldown, there are like these charges, these like battery charges that you kind of have to keep track of in the stats menu for her, because she does disarm herself after so many times of using her ability. But what's even crazier is that over time, despite that, right, getting disarmed after a few turns and not being able to attack, is that she does anywhere, I think it's between like 2 and 3 attacks, and they get progressively stronger over time, which is insane. Say you're doing like 100, the first turn, and then let's say like turn 3, you're doing 2 shots at like 140 or something like that, right? And then it goes up to like 3, and then her ultimate can do 15 shots. 15 shots, my guy. Okay, and that's like of her like base attack. So you're doing somewhere like around 130 15 times. I mean, she's a monster truck, honestly, and she's absolutely broken and so much fun to play. However, it does take time to learn her. She's not, your vanilla Shion or Sarah, right? Or Yori, right? You have to learn about her charges and play around the charges, because there's a very specific way to get the most damage out of Helen. But I think out of all the characters, I think she's tied with Shion in terms of how much damage she can do. The only downside is, if an enemy gets spread up in your face and they corner you, you're not going to be able to do anything, which kind of, I think, is kind of good for Helen in a way that it doesn't make her stupid OP, right? If an enemy manages to corner you, you're just not going to be able to do anything. But I think in 1v1s, or if a lot of your characters die, Helen can close out those boss fights, just because she's able to survive a lot longer by doing these attack downs on the opponent. So say for example, instead of having a Nightingale, if your enemy is doing less damage, then you end up having more health long term, right? So say for example, if you had Shion and you had Fran, and let's say, you know, somebody out of the B tier, right? If you paired her with like Ashanti or another DPS character or a tank, um, Helen could replace a Nightingale pretty easily, in my opinion, just because of how much damage you do and how much less damage the enemies are going to be doing. Which is why I think she 100% belongs in S tier, just for the sheer overpowered abilities and damage she can put out. Oh, and let's briefly talk about her weapons. I believe the floor price for her weapons is about $60, which is fair, which is what I really like, that, you know, it's not overpriced. And then you're looking at about, I want to say it's 120 for the epic, and then her legendary stuff goes for about 250. And so I think this is kind of balanced, you know, where you're paying basically double to get more and more overpowered abilities out of Helen, essentially. Alrighty, and our last character is Celeste. I think Celeste, funny enough, I don't think she's overpowered per se. It's just she has a really good blend of abilities, and she has great 1v1 potential. She doesn't need a healer, right? She can heal herself. She does a little bit less damage than Shion. However, I think her 1v1 potential is really good against enemy bosses. She can also attack everybody the same way Shion can. But what I really like about Celeste is not only can she attack pretty much anybody surrounding her, but so does her ultimate. And her ultimate heals her for half the damage you do to surrounding enemies. So if you do, you know, 3,000 damage, you're healing yourself 1,500, which is insane. Absolutely insane. But I think in terms of all the DPS characters, she has the most individuality and can carry a team once everybody dies. If she's the last one standing, you're gonna have okay odds at 1v1ing the enemy just by sheer survivability, which is why I put her in the S tier, right? Her weapons also make sense. Her weapons, however, are a bit overpriced. I think it's very similar to Shion, where you're looking at about $100 for her floor weapon, and then I think it goes up to around 170 to 200 for her epic. And then of course, you know, you're going up to like 350, 400 for the legendary stuff. I think, yeah, 350 to 400 for her legendary weapons. And the skins aren't terrible either. I think if you want to get an okay skin for her, currently it's about $70. So it's a bit more than Helen and Shion. But yeah, that has been our tier list. If you guys think that some of these characters belong in different tiers, or that we're missing something, you know, maybe a part 2 to this tier list can definitely be made. This is strictly for PvE. This tier list will be completely different for the PvP side of things. Currently, we are just looking at the PvE potential of all these characters. Love to know your opinions below in the comment section. If you guys enjoyed this video, definitely consider subscribing and dropping a thumbs up. We'll be releasing out more content. I've been Daggers. Kisses, smooches. Have a good day, guys. Bye.